Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike Phillips. This is the Leadership Toolkit. It's the definitive leadership podcast for you to grow yourself, for you to learn, bring your team along with you. And you can learn from our successes. You can learn from our failures. I try and have guests on from all kinds of different areas of business so that way you get different and unique perspectives from other people other than just myself. And we just go in and have a collaborative conversation on what leadership is, what leadership isn't, what we've learned along the way. So I am super excited today to bring on my friend. She's an amazing leader. She's an amazing mom, an amazing person, Miss Katie Jefferson. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Hi, Mike. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here. This is my first
Absolutely.
podcast.
Welcome to the show. And yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to be awesome. I like from everything that I know of you and your background and your experiences, I'm just excited to share with our audience and uh, talk through some of these ideas and some of your experiences with you.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, what I would love for you to do is if you would take a minute and just share with the audience some of your background. What do you do now? What have you done? And share some of your leadership and life experiences with everybody.
Yeah. My name's Katie Jefferson. I am a local realtor here in Colorado Springs. I have been doing that for about 4 years now. I am a mom of three. I am a wife. And I also am president of a booster club for my daughter's gymnastics team. Um, We've lived in Colorado Springs for about 7 years, and so for 4 of those years, I, became a realtor and really got immersed in my community. Before that, I was working in healthcare, as a CNA with spinal cord injury patients and brain injury patients, so most of my, work background is in healthcare, but I kind of took a giant right turn and became an entrepreneur.
That's amazing. And
Yeah,
actually, when you and I were first starting to talk about this podcast,
yeah,
that's something I didn't know that about you. I had no
yeah,
idea. I've always seen you as an amazing, connector person
yeah,
and a really good friend and certainly somebody like I said I've seen you in leadership roles recently. One of the things that you mentioned and for everybody out there, a couple things. First, if you're watching the show, please, I know Katie is going to drop some just absolute wisdom bombs, so make sure you
we'll
like the
see.
show, share the show, let everybody that you know about this podcast because it's going to be awesome.
Yeah,
um, so as we were talking and you said, hey, you ended up taking on some leadership roles in healthcare.
yeah.
So I seriously that blew my mind. I had no idea that was your background. So
Yeah, oh, sorry.
no, go
Right out
ahead.
of high school, I started working in the pharmacy at Walgreens. That's how I actually met my husband. But
Hi, Alex.
I wasn't the typical high school student. I kind of was always the chatty one, the stop talking in class type of girl. And so I just wasn't ready to go off to college. So I started working in the pharmacy and I did that for 9 years. And through that time, I was a senior pharmacy technician. So I was always training. They would send me out. Got sent out to New York once to help train Dwayne Reed pharmacies how to use our computer systems. So I just always, I think, had that natural ability to take control of situations and help teach people and just step up into that role.
Sure. So what would you say, like early on as you were starting to take on leadership roles, as you were teaching others,
Mhm.
what would you say were some keys to your success? What would you say are some things that you did, maybe one, two, three actions that you could pinpoint? Hey, this was part of my personality, or these
Mhm.
characteristics really helped me and had people looking to you. Can you pinpoint that?
Yeah, I think one of them is kindness. I'm able to talk to anyone and show compassion and kindness, which helps in healthcare, but also in the workplace and just getting to know your coworkers and being willing to share and learn. I was always one of the first people to volunteer to show someone how to train and do the job that they were hired to do. And so I think that's really key. I was just eager to help.
So
Um,
let me recap before you go run
yeah,
off. So kindness,
yeah,
the ability to communicate, the willingness to communicate with
mhm,
people, And then the third one you said here, because I like to break this down if anybody's taking notes and so forth, the fact that you were willing to take risks, the fact
Yeah.
that you're willing to jump in sometimes, and I think people don't realize how valuable that characteristic is of taking risks.
Yeah.
Fear of failure is a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Which is funny because I think I have a deep-rooted fear of failure, but it doesn't stop me.
Well, I think everybody has a deep-rooted fear
Yeah.
of failure. When you said it doesn't stop you, so I'm gonna catch you flat-footed on this one. How do
Yeah.
you overcome the fear of failure? Do you
I
what are
just
some
jump.
things?
I just jump. That's, I think that regret is scarier than change or not doing something that's a risk, and so I've just never been afraid to I get a crazy idea in my head, whether that was going back to school for nursing or jumping into real estate. I just jump head first, I tackle it, and, take things as they come.
So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good. I think it's really valuable because I think there's a lot of people, especially right now, post pandemic and so forth. And not
Mhm.
to dwell on that, but there's a lot of people, there's a lot of fear being sold to us out there.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people that are scared to jump, and sometimes there are
Mhm.
opportunities right in front of your face.
Mhm.
It's not even having to jump sometimes, is it? You just got to step over the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got into real estate pre-pandemic, right
Mhm.
before, and I got licensed, I joined a brokerage, and then about 6 months into it, the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, and that was a really scary time because I had just spent thousands of dollars and hours training and getting my license to be sitting at home on my computer praying that I would get a client or be able to do my job, and so that was scary, but you just stick with it and you take the scary jump.
Well, and I think one of the things you even said there that's valuable is sometimes you have to move from the 20,000-foot view
Mhm.
of what leadership is like, hey, I need to be a big vision person or a big
Yeah.
picture person, down to if you're in that situation, sometimes you just got to put your head down and work, right?
And yeah, that's what I did, and I think I work for a brokerage that really has encouraged that in all of their agents.
Mhm.
They never stopped during the pandemic doing trainings for us, Zoom classes and everything to keep our minds sharp and learning how to pivot and adapt to the change that was headed our way. Little did we know the market was going to explode during that time with interest
Sure.
rates so low that if you didn't adapt, you weren't going to get a piece of that pie and be
Sure.
successful.
So being willing to learn and being able to adapt, I would say, are two really good qualities of
Absolutely.
people that are in leadership roles. Real
Yeah,
quick, I'm going to pause here. Alex Wadsworth says he wants to know if there's going to be punch and pie after this. Is
I
that
hope so.
well,
I'm always
probably,
down for punch and pie. Is there
probably
tequila in it?
yeah, tequila punch and pie.
Yeah.
So let me ask you what, because I don't think you touched on this. What specifically made you, or what helped you in making the decision to pivot from I'm going to go from healthcare into real
Mhm.
estate? And obviously, no one had the foresight. Like we didn't know the pandemic was coming at the
Right.
time that it was. So, what were some of your decisions? What was the deciding factor to say, "Hey, I'm going to go over here and
Yeah,
do
so it's
this"?
kind of a crazy story. So I worked a night shift at a hospital, leading up to our move to Colorado Springs. My husband got promoted and we moved out here, and I just decided to be a stay-at-home mom for a little bit. And I'm not very good at that. I always need something to do, some leading something. I don't know that I ever recognized that in myself, but so I started a bunco group in my neighborhood. I started a Facebook group and I invited all these women that I didn't know over to my house to play bunco, a game I had never even played
I
before.
was going to say, what is a bunco group?
It's a dice game for old ladies, but I
Okay,
I decided to just jump headfirst to meet some friends. I was bored. And so I had this group of 12 women show up to my house that I had never met before. And one of them, who has now become a really good friend of mine, is a very successful realtor in town. And she couldn't believe that I had just randomly invited all these women to my house. And part of real estate is, talking to people you've never met before and being able to be authentic and build relationships. And she was like, you should go into real estate. You'd be really good at this. You can talk to anyone. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I've never seen myself doing that. But I also knew I didn't want to go back to healthcare. I didn't want to do 12-hour night shifts. I didn't want to
Sure.
be away from my family. And so I just kept thinking about it and told Alex a couple weeks later. I said, I think I'm going to get my real estate license. And he was like, okay. Because he always supports my crazy ideas. Like I said, I just jump headfirst into stuff. And so I just got my license and I didn't look back.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's simple. Like
Yeah.
we oftentimes it's so easy for us as humans just to overcomplicate stuff, isn't
Yeah.
it? To be like, well, should I do this? And well, let me write 10 reasons I should and 10 reasons I shouldn't. And then inevitably we dwell on the why we shouldn't instead
Yeah.
of like what you're saying. Hey, I just wait. I don't want to do overnights and let's
Yeah.
give this thing a run.
I mean, I was trading my time, a lot of time, 12-hour night shifts for time with my family, making pennies. As where real estate, I was able to I didn't realize how hard it was gonna be, first of all. It's very hard to get clients in the first place, but just doing so, I'm able to manage my own time, and I
Mhm.
doubled what I was making working night shift by doing
That's
that.
phenomenal. Well,
Yeah.
and one of the things that you said, just key, we were chatting just for a second right before we went on. And I think one of the things that's really valuable is learning to lead yourself
Yeah, that's a hard
rather than
one.
just leading others. And so, as you're saying here, I just did these things. I just started
Yeah.
doing this and put my head down and work. Let's talk about for a minute. I'm just going to pivot a little bit because one of the things you brought up was during this difficult time, 2020, 2021,
Mhm.
you have a good brokerage that was willing to train and do Zoom
Yeah.
calls and try to propel you forward, not just as a leader or manager or realtor, but as a person.
Yeah.
What are some key characteristics that stood out for you that the leadership in that organization provided to you? Or one, two, three things that you said, hey, this is a really good characteristic that a leader should have?
Yeah, so I think education. I think our leaders at our brokerage did a phenomenal job of just keeping us informed with what was going on. We noticed that a lot of other brokerages in town were not getting the correct information on whether or not we were essential employee or essential jobs that could go out and
Right.
sell houses. So they just always made sure to keep us informed with what was going on, what was legal at that time. But not only that, with what was going on with the market, because we were having to do very unconventional ways to sell a house. There were a lot of videos and, you know, drive-by closings at the title companies. It
Right.
was it was kind of crazy. So they just made sure to keep us very educated.
Okay.
And then another thing, there was a lot of depression going on at that time, and not only were they educating us, but they were bringing in motivational speakers over Zoom to keep us positive and keep our minds in a good place, to not follow that rabbit hole of watching the news of the market's going to crash and we're not going to have jobs and we're not essential, and just doomsday type of
Sure.
behavior. They stayed really positive, and then as soon as we were able to get back out there and sell homes, we did become essential. They just
hmm
provided us with every tool to be successful and keep everyone safe.
Okay. So educate. I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Just so education is a great
Mhm.
characteristic of leadership. Motivation and positivity.
Yeah.
What would you, if you had to pick a third one? What would a third one be?
Let's see, a third one. I think they listened. If someone was able, or it was having a particularly tough time, or if someone was down with COVID, the ability to like listen and let people vent, but then pull them out of it. So I think you have to be a good listener when you're a leader.
No, I think that's really good.
Yeah.
So, just again, just to recap, and I'll do this a few times during the
Yeah.
show, but like education, constant learning, leaders are learners, people that are
Mhm.
constantly learning and pushing and growing. Those people that are willing to learn, and then those that are willing to educate. I think one of the things that's most important in a leadership role is we can't educate others if we're not learning ourselves too,
Right.
right?
If you're
You
not
have
learning, you're not growing.
Absolutely, and you gotta keep people you have to stay out in front of people so you can sometimes pull them along, sometimes push them along, and so forth. And then you said motivation and positivity. I love that one. That's my jam.
Yeah.
And then the third one is that leaders listen. And I
Yeah.
think oftentimes it's easy to fall in the trap if we're in a leadership role. For people that are watching this right now, if you are in a leadership role or a management role, it's easy to fall in the trap of thinking, well, gosh, people always come to me and they want to vent, and they want, like, you become the camp counselor, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not downplaying that. What I'm saying is it's easy for us to view ourselves that way. Like, well, I'm a counselor, I got to listen to all this stuff. But think about this for a minute. And what Katie just said is, like, leaders listen, and we do counsel. And it's very important to realize that the reason that people are coming to you is because they trust you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's our job as leaders to empower those around us and give them a voice. And if you're not doing that, I think you're not being very valuable.
Absolutely. So when you were saying er, when you were saying earlier too, one of the things that you did, I'm going to backtrack for just a second, because you were talking about, hey, you were really growing yourself in that in between time, in between nursing and getting
Mhm.
into real estate. What are some things, because I know you pretty well. So what
Yeah.
are some what are some things that you did? Because I can absolutely see it. Like,
Yeah.
Katie's in the house doing her thing and she's like, okay, I just can't sit still. Besides the bunko group, what are some other things that you maybe did to grow yourself? What are some suggestions you could offer to people here that they could pick up and, like, hey, this will help propel you forward? What are some actionable items that you, off the top of your head?
So, to be honest, that's why I got my real estate license because I wasn't doing much of anything. I wasn't growing. I was staying stagnant. I was comfortable,
Okay.
and I can't sit still and do nothing. So, that's what propelled me to get my real estate license because I didn't feel like I was growing as a person at all. So, I did have a child in between that time, so took some time to be with her and be a mom for a little bit, and then I got back on the saddle. So, some things that I do to keep my mind right and to be a good leader is I do a lot of affirmations in the morning. I don't know, do you
Okay.
do affirmations, Mike?
I do,
Kind of a
absolutely.
woo-woo thing, like,
That's okay. I
but
like
I've
woo woo.
noticed in entrepreneurship, it's really, you have to constantly keep your mind right and stay positive, and that's something I do to keep my mind positive.
Well, I
So,
think I'm going to grab onto that for a second.
yeah,
Affirmations, one of the things that's so important, it's one thing when we're deliberate with what we put in, right? Like,
yeah,
you have to be deliberate, because otherwise, if you're just served stuff on Facebook all day, social media,
yeah,
whatever the news site of the week is, or news site, not news site, but news site, because the, a a lot of negativity exists out there because they're trying to
mhm,
grab our attention.
yeah,
And so I think it's really valuable that you say that, because the fact of the matter is we have to be deliberate in choosing what we're putting into our brain.
yeah,
But not only that, it does make a huge difference from just having something put in your brain to you actually putting it into words, right? Words are
absolutely.
powerful. Words are a powerful, powerful thing.
Well, and I think we're really, humans in general, we feed ourselves a lot of negative self-talk and self-doubt. And so it's rewiring your brain and thought process because if you say it enough times, your brain will start to believe it.
Well, absolutely. It's another little woo woo thing, but I believe this,
Yeah.
like the law of attraction,
Mhm.
right? The law of attraction, whatever you think about, whatever you are focused on, you will get more of. You're going to steer that direction. And the way that I always attach this, like, you remember being a little kid and learning to ride a two-wheeler bike.
Yep.
You remember
We
that?
just taught our little 5-year-old how to do that.
And inevitably, what do you, so this is perfect. If you taught your 5-year-old recently, where do you tell her to look when she's riding the bike?
Straight ahead.
You look straight ahead,
Yep.
because inevitably what happens if you go, oh, I don't want to hit the mailbox. I don't want to hit the mailbox. I don't want to hit the mailbox. And I start looking over here to the mailbox. What happens? You
You
hit the
hit the mailbox.
mailbox, you steer towards whatever you're looking at, right?
Yep.
And it's the same thing in leadership and life and business. Whatever you are looking towards, you're going to steer towards that.
Absolutely.
And so I think with you saying, positive affirmations, you're not just steering your brain towards that, but you're training your voice, you're training your verbiage, you're training your ears to hear yourself speak it into existence. That's really woo.
It is, in real estate, I think that there's a lot of woo-woo, in sales in general. You work
Sales.
in sales, so,
Mhm.
there's a lot of, like, motivational speakers and manifestation and all of that. But one of the things I took away, we did a course at my company called Ninja Selling. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. It's pretty
Okay.
specific to real estate.
Okay.
But one of the things they have you do each morning is pick one affirmation, and you write it down 25 times each morning. And there's kind of a science behind it that you retrain your brain and it becomes a habit. And after 25, or I think it's about a month, you truly believe that about yourself. So every morning I actually write down, I am successful, I am influential, and I'm wealthy.
Nice. I love it. I am
Yep.
successful, I am influential, and I am wealthy.
Yep.
And I might need to steal that from you,
It's a good
especially the
one.
wealthy part.
I'm still working on the wealthy part, but we'll get there.
Absolutely. So one of the things when we were talking about actionable items too, and you included, so you did say daily affirmations. One
Mhm.
thing that you brought up was to read.
Yeah, I love to
What
read. I'm a huge reader.
so what do you have, and this could seem like a silly question. You might be like, well, you just do it. But do you have a method to your reading and learning?
So I like taking recommendations from people. My work team, it consists of about, I think we have 14 people on our team right now. And
Okay.
so we typically will pick a book together, some kind of
Nice.
self-help book that can relate to helping us in our lives and our business. And so we'll pick it and we'll all read it together and then talk about it each week.
Okay.
And
It's like
so
a
that's
real
kind of
estate book club.
Kind of, yeah, just
Okay.
with our team, just to keep our minds right, and we talk about it and try to apply it to our business and our daily life.
Okay. That's
Yeah, so
good.
one of my favorites that we read recently was called The Four Agreements. I'm not sure if you've ever read that.
So here's an interesting story about that, because our management team, our leadership team, about
Mhm,
6 months ago, maybe,
mhm.
uh, picked that book and read it as a team.
Yeah.
So yes, I have read it. I love the book. I think it's great.
I think it's actually really key for leaders to read that book, and
Mhm,
especially with the team. I think it's great if everybody reads it because then, everybody's thinking about you're not assuming, right? That's one of
mhm.
the key agreements is, someone you may be trying to lead someone that's being rude in the workplace or making decisions that you don't understand why they're doing something. You can't assume why they're making that decision.
Absolutely.
'Cause
No,
if
and I just thought it was interesting because I know that was one of the books you mentioned when you emailed me back. I was like,
Yeah,
"That's so crazy," because we read that as a team, and I did enjoy that book.
yeah.
What are so do you so you said, okay, you pick it as a team. Do you do like any highlighting? Do you go back and reread? Do you read something once and then and that's all? Do you ever take notes on books? I'm just curious when I'm asking the method, or do you
Yeah.
just put it in your brain and
I pretty much put it in my brain, but I do read from my phone 90% of the time. So I'll highlight things from there and go back and
love it?
look at it or take a screenshot of a specific passage I might like
No,
from it.
I do that. I do that a lot. I'll take screenshots and then share it
Yeah.
on social media, because one of the cool things you can do if you do that,
Yeah.
to like a year from now, 3 years from now, then that is one of the good things about social media is
Yeah.
it'll come up and say, "Remember this?" Right.
And you're like,
And
"Oh,
it's
yeah, I'm not practicing that anymore."
yeah.
Should
Oh,
probably
uh,
try to stop assuming that someone's doing something that way.
absolutely. What other books? Can you give me a couple other books? What other
Yeah,
ones do
this
you
one's
like?
kind of cheesy, but I recently and this one I did on Audible, while I was driving. That's another
Okay.
thing with a lot of times with, like the self-help or leadership books I like to listen to while I'm driving,
Mhm.
and it's Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I don't know if you've heard of
I've
that
heard of
one.
it. I've never read it
Yeah,
or heard it. Does he narrate the book?
he does, so I
That's
definitely
awesome.
recommend the Audible on that one because he has a Southern drawl, and
Yeah.
he just has a lot of wisdom and life experience to share. And just a lot of positivity about believing in yourself and, seizing the day and the opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and one thing I really like, I'll throw a book recommendation out here if you haven't, and it's a little rough around the edges.
Mhm.
There's some language, but "Can't Hurt Me" by David Goggins. Um,
Oh, my
it
team has read that one.
it's definitely a little rough around the edges, but it's about grit.
Yeah.
And David Goggins wrote it from the perspective of a Navy SEAL. One of the things I thought was cool on that, and again, you got to be ready if you're that person, like earmuffs, right? Because he drops some language, but
Yeah.
the they recorded that audiobook while he was doing like a 2-day stint for a podcast. And so there's
Mhm.
outtakes of stuff that's not in the book. That's one of the things that I think
Oh,
is so cool when authors will share their take on the book. And sometimes it's stuff that's like you would have never imagined. So I think I agree with you. Audiobooks can be really
yeah.
advantageous.
And
When are you
he's a
writing
really
your
big
book?
inspiration.
When are you
He
writing your book? um,
Someday, that's actually a goal of mine someday.
That would be awesome. I think it would be amazing to read. And then one of the other things, and you've brought this up a couple times, and actionable items, you said never stop learning. So
Yeah.
besides books, what are some other favored ways that you like to get in and be able to educate your mind?
I actually think podcasts are such a unique and accessible way to learn every day from so many, everybody has a podcast now, it seems like, but there's so
The
many
cool people.
influential people that have podcasts about and with guest speakers. It's just like a library of knowledge that you can log on and listen to a podcast at any time. So I really like to do that while I'm driving if I'm not rocking out to Taylor Swift or something.
Did you go see Taylor Swift when she
I
was?
sure did.
How was that?
It was amazing. I wanna
That's
relive
awesome.
it.
So let me ask you a couple of other questions here, if I may. So when you are, because you work very much on a peer level with other people in your office,
Mhm.
correct? And
Yep.
I have to imagine, though I don't work with you, I have to imagine people come to you with ideas, collaborative ideas, and so forth, just because
Yeah.
you are a person that executes. Um, what would you say are some essential qualities, maybe from a leadership perspective or a peer perspective, that you look for in people you want to bring on board or people that you want to work with or collaborate with? So rather than just a leadership perspective, what characteristics should somebody have to be able to collaborate with another leader or another peer in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a really good question because, I work on a team of like 14 people. So
Hmm.
we collaborate a lot and we are all very, very busy. And we're constantly, sometimes people leave the team and new people come on and it's a revolving door at times. And so something that we kind of all as a team look for, and me specifically too, is work ethic. Are you willing to put in the work? And are you
Absolutely.
positive? Are you kind? Are you able to communicate? Or do you just wanna be on our team because we're a top team in Colorado Springs, but not really you don't have the work ethic to do what it takes?
Right. And I think there's a lot of people that they're like, hey, I want to be on a winning team. Now, and there is
Yeah.
something to be said. We've all heard it said, right? You're the sum of your five closest
Yep.
connections or your five closest relationships. So there is something to be said if somebody's not quite there and they're firing up, right? They're
Mhm.
like, hey, I want to be on that team because I have something to learn from you. Uh, but the reality is in a relationship, they have to bring something to the table too. And
Right.
I think like you
Absolutely.
said, first thing is I agree with you wholeheartedly. First thing you got to look for is work ethic.
Mhm.
Um, so when you're talking about like workplace collaboration, you said you have 14 people that are
Yeah,
working
I
on
think it's
together.
14 now.
Okay, so
Always changing.
when you have when you have people that are all collaborating,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts? Are you somebody that's more um, when you're managing a group of people, are you more authoritarian or are you more consensus as a leadership
Um,
style?
I think a little mix of both. I I don't mind I like to take everybody's ideas
Hmm.
and then talk about it, let everyone voice their opinions, but I have no problem making the decision if we can't come to a certain collaborative decision. So I think
Sure.
that that's something you give everyone a voice, you listen, you take ideas, and maybe you mix them all together to come up with something greater, or you have to, as a leader, make the decision of what you think is best.
So, what happens if you make the decision that you think is best and it doesn't work?
Mhm. That
What?
never happens, Mike.
No,
Just kidding.
but seriously, what
Well, I
happens
think
if
you
you make
just
a decision
pivot.
you're headed?
You pivot, you adapt, I think you acknowledge that maybe your idea didn't work,
Sure.
and then you start over.
Well, and I think that's really one of the key points you just said is like you have to acknowledge that it didn't work.
Yeah.
The people that are around you, especially if you're collaborative with a team, and we'll use the number that you're working with now. If it's 14 other people, uh, if it's you and 14 others, and you're rocking and rolling, you say, "Yeah, let's go this direction because I'm in charge of this project, or I'm in charge of this team at the moment," and you head off down that direction, and you refuse to acknowledge that you have at least 13 of those 14 people looking at you going,
What is
when
she
are you
doing?
yeah, when are you going to admit that this didn't work for you? And
Yeah,
so I think that's something that uh, that's really valuable. I think it's humbling
it
from a
is
leadership
humbling.
experience.
I think that it's really important to acknowledge when you're wrong and apologize when necessary.
Absolutely. So can you I'm going to catch you flat-footed on this one too,
Okay.
is can you maybe share a time that, and not necessarily that you were wrong, but that you took a tact and started down a path and that it didn't work, and you don't have to share the specifics, but um can you share a time that something like that happened, and what was your approach besides just acknowledging it? Then what else happened?
Yeah. So, for the first thing that comes to mind for me is actually with the nonprofit booster club that you and I both serve on.
Sure.
One of the things, and it wasn't actually my decision to go down this route, but I was in charge of it either way. And it
Sure.
was when we were making a scheduling system for one of the events that our booster club runs. And I was tasked with setting up the sign up genius to
Hmm.
get all this figured out, and there were a couple times it just did not work in my mind. It didn't work out in real life the way it was going to work out in my mind, and
Sure.
it was kind of a disaster, to be honest. And I had no problem having to say, "You know what? I didn't do XYZ properly, and this is why this happened. I'm going to fix it. I'm gonna cover whatever shifts didn't work out because of it," and I took accountability, and we moved on.
So if I can compliment you on that, by the way, because I know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and so coming in from the side, from somebody that watched that unfold, and bear in mind, I was the recipient of some of the, like, the emails and the communication and
Yes.
so forth. Um, and I think a lot of people don't realize, hey, this didn't work. Like, hey, it didn't work how they wanted it to, but it was still, there was this certain front view that it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the two things that stood out to me is, you're absolutely right. You acknowledged it by through communication with everybody,
Mhm.
and this is to benefit anybody that's watching this podcast, because I was on the other end of this with Katie when things just did, and it wasn't like here's the interesting thing, it wasn't like it was, you weren't the catalyst for that, right? You were just like, hey,
Right,
I'm trying to find the solution, and here I'm going to go do this, and the catalyst was the software did not work out how you wanted it to, how we
right.
wanted it to. And so then it was like, one, through communication, I think that was
Mhm.
really huge. Like, you did a fantastic job of just communicating with people and saying, hey, this didn't work. Here's how we're going to handle it. And then also the fact, and as much as it sucks, we'll call it like it is, like, if there was open slots, that's one of the things sometimes leaders have to do. You got to fill the holes.
Yeah, and oftentimes it was me doing it.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Like, and I will tell you, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, that's one thing that can suck. If you're a leader and you're like, okay, because we always say, like, oh, well, you got to step up and do this, right? You got to step up and you just got to do it. And
mhm,
it's like, but we're still human. You look at it and go, well, yeah, but this sucks.
yeah,
Right. I mean, that has to be the reality. Didn't that go through your head? So
yeah,
I'm like, okay, this sucks. But at the end of the day, one of the things for me, and I say this genuinely, having watched you go through that, you gained a lot of respect from a lot of people, myself included, with the fact that it's like, hey, there's just no holes because Katie stepped up and did it. And my wife said behind the scenes, she was like, gosh, that had to suck. Like that really did have to suck.
It did, but, I think as a leader, if you're not willing to get down and dirty and do the hard work and practice what you're preaching to everyone, then how effective are you?
Absolutely. And I think th- there's a lot to be said about, practicing what you preach, doing what you say you're going to do.
Mhm.
Leadership through action is a real thing.
Yeah,
Like you just grab a hold of it and you do, right?
absolutely.
There are a lot of people, and you've seen this, Katie. There are a lot of people in leadership roles that lead through theory,
Mhm.
and they say, "Well, I think it's more powerful to lead through imperfect action than it is to try and lead through perfect theory."
Absolutely, I agree with that statement.
So, let me ask you this, because we were talking about collaboration a little bit ago too.
Yeah,
How do you deal with people? Because sometimes we get into this stuff. Like it's easy to host a podcast and talk about all the warm and fuzzy and all the good
yeah.
stuff, right? And hey, oh well, and we can get some really good quips in there and some good quotes. But the hard stuff is like, how do you manage people? How do you lead people, especially in a group that all
Mhm.
have different ideas when they don't get along?
Well,
This is not
that's
directed
just
at anyone in particular.
um,
Disclaimer.
well, I think I'm taking over the booster club after a very difficult last year
True.
that we both experienced together.
Hmm.
And so, I really came into my own voice, I think, during all of that. I It was hard. It is hard when you're in a room and not everyone can get along, but I think having a plan, organizing, and being transparent with everyone can often alleviate that, and you need to stay on task. We don't Not everyone in a room has to like each other, but you
Sure.
do need to be respectful, and I think that setting up those expectations ahead of time is really important, and, letting everyone know when it's your turn to speak, it is your turn to speak, and truly giving that person, even if you don't like them, their time to speak and
Sure.
feel heard and give them respect. And so I think, just having a plan going into situations, if whether it's a meeting or whatever, to stay on topic so that there's not all this side room for arguments and fighting.
Sure. Well, and I think the one thing that anybody needs to realize in life, in families, like you could take any group of people,
Mhm.
and one thing that we get sold often is either, oh gosh, everybody gets along here all the time, or nobody gets along here none of the time. And it's like, well, the reality is there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of filler in between that. Probably, if I had to guess, and I'm just picking a number, but let's say 60% of the time, most everybody's somewhat in sync, right?
Yeah.
And then 20% of the time, everybody's like, heck yeah, let's do that, right? Especially if it comes to like punch and pie, vodka punch and pie, right? Or tequila. What was the choice earlier?
Tequila punch.
Tequila punch and pie. Like, okay, everybody can get on board with that, right? But then there's also 20% of the time that it depending, like, again, we're on a board together. Let's say you have 10 members or you have 14 realtors. You might have 10 different ideas trying to accomplish one thing.
Yeah,
Eh,
and I think it's important to note too that it's okay for people to not get along and have differing ideas.
Absolutely.
That's actually very healthy to have discussions, and especially on a board, it's very important to have people that aren't going to just say, "Oh, great idea, Mike. Let's go with that," without challenging you.
I've been in situations like that. I think
Yeah.
it makes us a sharper, cleaner unit on
Mhm.
anything when somebody, because here's one of the things that comes in place. When somebody challenges you an idea, or when somebody challenges you on an idea, you have to articulate why your idea is a good one,
Yeah,
or you have to articulate why it's good to try. Y-
absolutely.
and I think one place, and you and I've been in situations where we've seen this happen. One place that often uh, we run into problems anywhere in leadership is people will present their ideas. We'll get 10 different ideas. We'll get 14 different ideas. We'll get however many, you'll get two different ideas. And if you have two different ideas, instead of me taking ownership over my idea or my approach and saying, let's do it this way and here's why, oftentimes people will default to, well, let me attack the other one and so show why it's no good. Don't people do that sometimes?
Mhm.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
And there could be a time and place for it, but I would encourage you, if you're watching or listening to the show here, spend more time. If you're going to share something, it's really valuable to spend the time to uh, accentuate more why you have the good idea, be able to articulate that rather than why somebody else doesn't have a good one.
Yeah. Back up your idea a little bit. Do
Absolutely.
some research. Be prepared.
So one of the things that you said earlier, and we're kind of coming down the pipe on this, but you said motivation and positivity was something that was valuable
Mhm.
from your leadership team during the pandemic, which was a difficult time for everybody. Motivation and positivity, I think, goes a long way. I think that's something you've done a good job as the president in the nonprofit role you're in. Uh, what are some things that you would recommend for other people? Like what can they do to help motivate others? Can you motivate other people? One. What are some
Yeah.
things they could do? Yes, you think you can motivate other people? So what are
I
some things
mean,
to,
I think so. I think just sharing and communicating what you do to keep yourself motivated will help motivate people, but also being an example. And I would hope that I have, you know, friends at my company that maybe just got their license in real estate, that they see the struggle and how I haven't quit because, real estate is one of the largest dropout rates after a year.
yep.
After getting your license, people think it's really quick to get it, which it is. You can get it very quickly, but they don't realize how hard it's going to be. And so the dropout rate, I don't know the percentage, but it's high. It's like I want to say it was like 90% quit
I was gonna
after
say,
before their first year.
yeah, I was gonna say in sales, I think in general,
Yeah,
the rate is like 74%. And I think real estate's higher than that. So
yeah.
that's for sure. So um when we're talking about motivation and positivity, I'm going to pontificate here for a second. I mean, I think one of the things that for us to motivate other people is, you said early on, like, you have to be able to listen
Mhm.
and you have to know people. You can't motivate somebody if you don't know what drives them,
Right.
right? And so I think knowing yourself, like you had said, like, hey, I know myself, and one of the things is I got to be growing.
Yeah.
Um, so let me ask you. We talked about leadership strengths. We talked about things that are good characteristics. So be my last question of 20 questions for you.
Okay.
Are there people that are, and I don't have a better way to word this, but like, are there leadership weaknesses? Are
Oh,
there things that it's
absolutely.
okay? So give me some.
Yeah.
What are,
Negativity, first of
okay.
all.
Okay.
Um, One of the things that I think is a very poor leadership choice is to exert dominance over the people you're leading or surrounded with, trying to exert control over this is how it's got to be, this is how it's going to be, and just constantly, like, for example, I know someone in my life that has a job that their boss is just constantly do this better, you're not doing this, and it's just draining, and you're not
Sure.
motivating your people to do a good job if you are constantly just delegating and being negative.
Okay. What else? So negativity, constant control. What's another
Mhm.
leadership weakness or two?
I think
What do you
poor
think?
organization, lack of transparency.
Poor organization's a good one,
Yeah.
because like, if you can't, well, and here's one of the things too to realize, I think. Poor organization's a good one. You said lack of transparency. How,
Mhm.
expand on that a little bit? Lack of
Um,
transparency.
I think communicating why you're making decisions. You don't have to justify yourself to everyone in every situation, but I think if you're in a situation, for example, leading our booster club. So
Mhm.
I'm put into a position as president where I'm in charge of making sure we don't lose our nonprofit status and keeping people motivated to raise money. And then we're also in charge of a lot of funds. We bring in a lot of money that gets
Sure.
distributed, and I think
A
just
surprising amount, really.
a really surprising amount. And I think being transparent and communicating, sometimes over communicating why we're making decisions or what's going on, it instills in people to have belief and trust in you, and it motivates them that they're part of something that they want to be a part of and work hard for.
I think you're spot on. I think the fact that when people know what's coming at them, even if it's not the shiny object, even if it's
Mhm.
not perfectly polished, if people know what's coming, if people know what to expect, I think then they feel like they have the ability to do something about it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if you keep things from people, if you're not, and you're saying over communicating, but the reality is not everybody sees every piece of communication. We all communicate differently,
right.
right? Like you may be really receptive to text or email,
Mhm.
or you said earlier, podcasts or reading, or one-on-one face-to-face communication. Let's go sit for coffee and so on and so forth. But people communicate differently. So that's,
Right,
I think, something that we miss is like oftentimes people in leadership roles go, well, I sent an email.
right,
But the reality is, like, well, yeah, you sent one email. And if that person's got an email box full of 4,000 unread emails, is that the best way to communicate with them?
right. I think it's
So,
always important to ask in business, like, especially in sales when I'm working with a new client, "What's your preferred method of communication?" Ask them,
sure.
because,
Because,
I may think that they want me to call them for every moment of our transaction when buying or selling a house, when really they're like, "No, no, no. Text me. I don't like to talk on the phone."
well, and it could be too, it takes some buildup, right?
Yeah.
Texting allows you to, that may be their initial mode of communication. But then
Mhm.
once you have a real relationship with them, the things
Mhm.
change, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's super valuable as well. So Katie, as we're coming to the tail end of the show here, first off, thank you for joining me. Like, it's always a good conversation with you.
Yeah.
um
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So how can people get in touch with you? And Katie is local to Colorado Springs. She is an
Yeah.
awesome communicator. She's an awesome realtor. I'll give her the pitch right now, so you make sure and tell people, like, where are you at, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I work for the Cutting Edge Realtors here locally in Colorado Springs. I service all the surrounding areas, so Monument, Castle Rock, Pueblo, um, Falcon, and you can reach me over Instagram at Katie Sells 719 or Facebook at Katie Sells 719, or you can get my info from Mike and send me
Absolutely.
a text or a
And
call.
if I was more prepared, I would have put it up on the screen, but that
That's
was
okay.
something we forgot to talk about. So Katie sells 719. I know if you look that up, then she's available all over the
Yeah.
place. So thank you again for joining me today, Katie. I
Yeah.
am
Thanks for having me, Mike.
absolutely, and I'd love to have you on the show again and have more conversation.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go ahead and take us out. And
Okay.
with that, everybody, that's going to bring us to the conclusion of another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and join us and join Katie and I. Again, I highly encourage you, connect with her, especially if you're local and you're looking for a real estate agent. She's amazing. However, if you're looking for somebody that you have the opportunity to learn from, that is truly kind, that practices what she preaches, then you should connect with Katie. She's absolutely phenomenal. I would encourage you to please do me a favor. If you've gained something from this show, please share the show out, throw some likes on the show. And if you know of somebody that could benefit from this, make sure and share it with them. All we want to do is make an impact and help leaders grow themselves and their teams. So thank you, everybody, for joining me today. I appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday. We'll talk to you soon, everyone.